3 days ago, at the lip of a cliff, my son and his wife shoved us into the air. Bones cracked, blood salted my mouth. My husband whispered,
"Linda, don't move, play dead."
I went still. I listened to leaves scrape the rock, and to our children practicing the story of an accident. Between two thin breaths, something slow and deep settled in me for years. In the name of peace, I let my heart be treated as small after they left. My husband told me a truth that split the past wide open. When he finished, I made one quiet wish if we were saved. I would start again from zero, and I would make them answer for what they've done. God heard me, amen. Want to know what I did next? Pour a glass of milk, slice a little cake, settle into your sofa, and listen. Mornings used to arrive soft here. The kettle would click, the window would fog, and the little sparrows would argue in the maple like old neighbors with time to spare. I'd pour 2 mugs his black, mine sweet, and listen to Tom's boots cross the kitchen like punctuation. Sawdust followed him the way chalk dust followed me. He carried the smell of cedar. I carried the echo of children learning to sound out hope. It was ordinary, and that was the point. Ordinary was the quilt we wrapped around all our sharp edges. We paid the mortgage, fixed the fence, waved to Mrs. Ellis when her dog escaped again. Peace. I thought then, wasn't grand. It was a sink left clean and a lamp left on. If you'd asked me what I prayed for, I'd have said, more of this, please. Still, every quiet house hums with secrets, the way a shell hums with the ocean it can't hold. Mike was sunlight with shoes on laughing before he finished a thought, helping Tom in the shop, coming home with splinters and stories. He filled the air without meaning to. Danny moved like the shadow that proves the light exists quieter. Careful, eyes always taking inventory. I told myself a mother's love doesn't measure, it gathers. I set 2 plates, kissed 2 foreheads, applauded 2 report cards taped crooked on the fridge. Still, if I'm honest, the house tilted toward Mike's noise, and I spent years straightening pictures that never stayed level. The boys argued sometimes about chores, money, whose turn to start the mower. I heard doors, not words. I chose peace, not truth. That's what I told myself. Looking back, I wonder if love, improperly tended, becomes a kind of blindfold. We call it fairness, but it's a fear of naming the ache between brothers, a fear that naming it would make it real. Sundays smelled like pot roast and dish soap. After church, we'd loosen our collars, pass the basket of dinner rolls, and bow our heads for a prayer that was mostly gratitude and a little bargaining. Tom built that oak table from a stubborn tree. Every knot was a story, every groove a lesson about pressure and patience. Mike would talk big engineering schools, bridges he'd design, places he'd go that we'd trace with our fingers on a dusty atlas. Danny ate steady and quiet, cutting his meat into equal squares, building small order in a world louder than he liked. Sometimes I caught him watching Mike the way you watch a parade. You're not marching in admiration, irritation, something tangled. I refilled glasses. I asked about homework. I tried to keep conversation floating like a centerpiece no one could drop. It felt like mothering. It might have been avoidance dressed as hospitality. Grief doesn't arrive with sirens. It knocks like a neighbor, then moves in. That night, the clock flicked past midnight, then 1, then 2. I called Mike's friends, then the hospital, then the space between calling and praying where your throat burns. Flashlights combed the gorge at dawn, white cones trembling over rock and water. Accident, the officer said, as if grief could be filed like paperwork. I nodded because nodding is what mothers do when words won't fit inside them. Tom held me up by the elbows. I remember the smell of river and metal, the way sound went underwater. People brought casseroles, said he's in a better place, and I smiled like a patient learning to walk. The house shrank around us. Mike's room stayed warm for days, like sunlight had been living there. I washed his sheets anyway, folding each corner like a ritual against the unfixable. Black dress, damp tissue. The hymn everyone knows, but no one can sing on key when their hearts are fractured. I stood beside a photograph of my boy and practiced breathing in for love, out for letting go. Tom's hand trembled where it held me, a small earthquake with no safe doorway. Danny stood very still, like he'd been told not to spill something invisible. People said he was being strong. I wanted him to cry. I wanted him to melt in my arms so I could pour us both back into one whole. Instead, we drove home behind the hearse, and the porch light we'd left on felt foolish, like calling a dog who's already run past the fence of this world. Grief rearranges furniture without asking. You bump shins on new darkness. You try to remember where you keep the light. The chair Mike favored stayed empty, loud as thunder. After the funeral, Danny became helpful the way rain becomes steady dishes and done before I asked. Trash out, groceries carried in, the car warmed on cold mornings. He's growing up, neighbors said, and I agreed because the alternative was a question I wasn't brave enough to hold. He asked about my day, about the children learning vowels, about Tom's joints when the weather turned mean. It was kindness shaped perfectly to our needs, like a suit cut on a body you've measured. I wanted to trust it. Maybe he wanted me to, too. We settled into a rhythm soft shows after dinner, half a slice of pie, lights clicked off by 9. The house stopped screaming. It just sighed. But sometimes, when Danny thought I wasn't looking, his face drifted blank, like clouds rolling over a field. Kindness without roots can look exactly like kindness, until a wind comes. Jess came smiling, carrying a store-bought pie and a hand-sewn thank you note in the same afternoon, prepared for both outcomes. She called me Mom easily, the way some people walk into water without flinching. Tom liked her laugh. It rang true. 2 babies followed pink fists, midnight milk, tiny socks escaping the dryer's memory. We took pictures in front of the oak table, the one Mike had polished before prom. In photos, I look happy. I was happy, in the way a person is when they decide to hold only the gentle truth. Holidays resumed their shapes, stockings went up, candles dripped wax like time we could keep. Jess knew how to arrange a room, how to season a story, how to make a plan sound like a present. I didn't recognize the faint metallic taste beneath the sugar. You can love a person's kindness and still not know their hunger. We weren't rich, we were careful. 40 years of patching pockets and saying no to the shinier thing enough for a modest will. A little land, some savings that smelled like effort. Over coffee, Danny said, almost casually. Let Jess and me handle it. Easier when you're older. He smiled the way you learn to smile when you want something to sound like care. I heard my own voice answer, maybe, because mothers practice that word when they're not ready to say yes or no. Later, I ran my finger along the banister Tom built, counting the nicks like rosary beads. Legacy is a strange word. It feels like a quilt, but weighs like a stone. I wanted to trust my son with our future because it meant I didn't have to admit I was afraid of my present. The first red flag often arrives pleated like a ribbon. Bob's office smelled like paper and lemon oil, a church where the hymns are contracts. He talked trusts, beneficiaries, options for the grandkids, sensible paths. I nodded, learning the language of later. Danny leaned forward too far, suggesting he and Jess be listed as sole heirs for efficiency. Promising fairness would trickle down like good rain. Jess touched my wrist, warm as sympathy, in the reflection of a brass lamp. I watched my face choose politeness over instinct. Bob cleared his throat, the way men do when they feel a draft no one else admits. I asked about splitting evenly, about transparency, about keeping things simple. Danny laughed, light, like I'd told a joke that missed the room. I left with brochures and a headache that didn't own its name. Good intentions can be a cloak. They hide what they need to. They also cover the eyes of the cold. The advice kept coming. Wrapped in tissue paper, sell the house before the market dips. Switch insurance. Consolidate accounts. Sign a power of attorney, just in case. Safety, they said. Is love spelled with paperwork? I folded each suggestion into a drawer in my mind and felt the drawer stick. Jess walked through our rooms with a decorator's gaze, measuring windows, smiling at equity like it was a grandchild. Danny spoke in numbers, as if decimals could tuck us in at night. I started waking before dawn, standing in the kitchen while the kettle thought about boiling, listening for a sound that would tell me I was wrong to worry. The dictionary offers 2 meanings for care to look after and to feel anxiety. I lived between them, handing out cookies and questions. Tom called it prudence. I called it a pebble in my shoe that wouldn't shake out. In the quiet after dishes, with the TV murmuring about other people's troubles, I said, "Something's off." Tom rubbed the bridge of his nose, the way he does when the grain fights the blade. "He's trying to help," he answered, and I wanted to believe him. Marriage is a long conversation interrupted by chores. Sometimes you choose harmony over clarity because morning always comes and someone has to make the coffee. But I saw a flicker in Tom's eyes, a weather change he tried to hide. He kissed my forehead, turned off the lamp, and the room filled with the gentle ticking of a house pretending to sleep. Water threaded through the pipes, a lullaby we'd grown up on. I lay awake, counting breaths, naming gratitudes, bargaining again. Peace is precious. It is also fragile. You can love a person and still feel alone in a truth you can't yet say aloud. Danny brought it up between bites of pie, as if risk were a flavor we could wash down. "Just in case," he said, sliding a blue pen across a printout. The words "power of attorney" bold as a bruise. He spoke the language of storms, the ones that might never come, and asked me to board the windows anyway. It's protection, Mom, efficiency. I heard care. I heard control. Both sound alike when you want to be comforted. Tom cleared his throat, that small carpenter's warning I'd learned to respect. And yet he said nothing more. The page looked harmless boxes, initials, signatures that turn keys you can't see. I touched the line where my name would live and felt my stomach pull tight, like a thread snagged. "Let us think," I said, practicing boundary as if it were a new vowel. Danny smiled too quickly. Jess refilled my coffee, sweetening it past my taste. "Safety, handed to you in paperwork, can taste like surrender." I dialed Sue because sisters are the mirrors that tell the truth, even when you don't ask for it. The phone rang twice. She answered with my name. And I remembered being 12 and brave. I told her about the papers, the pen, the kindness arranged like furniture you can't quite sit on. "If he's doing so well," she said, voice steady as a metronome, "why does he need the keys to your pockets?" I stared at the calendar where I'd circled nothing special and felt a circle close around something I hadn't named. "Maybe it's just planning," I offered, "because mothers apologize for caution. Planning is fine," Sue said, "but control wears planning's coat." In the pause, I heard her breathe, and I matched her. Watch the eyes, Lynn. Watch who benefits when your life gets smaller. After we hung up, the house felt taller, the shadows honest. Doubt can be mercy in sensible shoes, walking you back from a cliff you can't see yet. I chose afternoon light, the kind that softens hard things. About the papers, I began. Palms flat on the oak table Tom built to hold truth. Danny's smile arranged itself like silverware neat. Correct, impersonal. "Family responsibility," he said, the words clicking into place like a lock turning. He leaned back, eyes cool, and for a heartbeat I saw a boy hunting approval. Then it was gone. "You raised me to be prepared," he added. I heard a rehearsed line. "Prepared is a plan we agree on." I answered, surprised at my own steadiness, not a pen waiting for my hand. The room went quiet enough to hear the fridge cycle on, the small machinery of a life I still owned. He laughed once, a sound with no warmth in it, then studied me the way Tom studies a board for faults. "Don't make this harder than it is." The sentence floated, then landed with weight. Love doesn't threaten. Control does, even when it smiles. Jess arrived mid-conversation the way music slips under a door. She set down a plate of cookies and a stack of numbers current premiums. Estimated market value. Interest rates dressed like reassurance. "Let us take the worry," she said, touching my wrist, pulse to pulse. "You've carried enough." She asked for specifics, the way a nurse asks for symptoms, savings totals, account locations, policy beneficiaries. I answered sideways, the way a woman does when her gut is louder than her manners. Jess's eyes are pretty in a catalog way, reflective more than revealing, and when she smiled, I could see my hesitation floating in them like a leaf on water. "Easier for the kids," she cooed, and the picture she painted was tidy, less paperwork, fewer calls, more rest. I wanted rest. I also wanted my name to keep meaning keeper of the house, somewhere between the spreadsheets and the sugar. I felt the shape of a trap, well lit and carpeted. Night made a small bell of the kitchen. Every drip struck it. I washed slow, letting the water scald scents into my hands. Tom dried, his towel moving circles into plates. Patient as weather. "About Mike," he said, and the towel paused. His voice changed temperature, something cold surfacing through warm water. "There's a thing I never told you." The faucet hissed. I turned it off. The room rearranged itself around those words. A new gravity. I saw the old gorge in my mind without wanting to sheriff's tape. Damp rock, the way sound had fallen that day. "Tom," I asked, "because wives say the name of the man they trust when they're about to test the trust." He set the plate down carefully, as if truth were fragile, as if it might shatter if we didn't touch it right. "I should have said it years ago," he whispered. "Time doesn't heal what silence keeps alive. It only teaches it to speak softer." His words came uneven, like boards pulled from a wall, splinters of memory catching as they slid free. "He'd followed the boys that night," he said, a bad feeling moving his feet. "He found them by the gorge, voices up, hands out, papers waving like surrender flags no one meant. Money, inheritance. Mike loud with righteousness, Danny edged with something I didn't have a name for then." "I saw it," Tom said, eyes on the grain of the table. Danny pushed, not a stumble, a shove. The kitchen shrank and stretched, the way a room does during an earthquake. Air went thin. My hand found the back of a chair and held on. "He said it was an accident. He begged me." Tom's mouth shook around the next sentence. I believed him because I needed to. I replayed 25 Christmases in a heartbeat, heard the space Mike left turn into a script we all memorized. Truth doesn't rot in the ground, it waits for rain. Tom's apology lived in his shoulders, rounded by years carrying what didn't fit him. I told myself confession would bury us all, he said. I told myself you'd break. I wanted to be angry for both of us. But grief is a thief that knows every hiding place. It stole my fury first. He spoke of the night after the gorge, Danny trembling, swearing it was a mistake he'd never repeat, promising to set things right if given time. And I wanted to keep the half of our family I had left. Tom whispered, the kind of honesty that makes a man look older and truer. Love can be a mercy, misused. It's a muzzle. I held his hand, felt the calluses that built our life and the fault that cracked it. We can't keep paying the debt of his lie, I said, the sentence surprising us both. The room agreed. Somewhere, a pipe sighed. Forgiveness without truth is just good manners pretending to be grace. Once you pull one thread, the sweater tells you everything. Tom had seen withdrawals small at first, then bolder round numbers that pretend to be groceries. Tools, generosity. He'd asked Danny then, quietly, and been fed the polite lies of a child who knows your threshold's business needs. Temporary shortfalls. I'll replace it, Dad. The statements spread on the table like a map of places our trust had gone and not come back from. I remembered a vacation we didn't take, a roof we patched instead of replacing, the way I rationed cream for coffee near month's end. Each choice had worn Danny's fingerprints while we thanked tight times. Silence was part of the theft. It made room for it. Laid out a welcome mat. We let him practice on our mercy. I said, tasting metal. Tom nodded. A man who'd measured twice and still cut wrong. When love is a ledger without accountability, someone will balance it in blood or in ink. Tom had gone further because builders investigate what creaks. He'd checked liens, called suppliers, followed the paper trail until it stopped pretending to be tidy. Over 100,000 owed. Names we didn't recognize. Interest that bites like winter. The shop, our proud little miracle of saw and song, was bleeding out behind a smile. I pictured Danny carrying debt like a sack, dropping pieces of it in our living room under the label help. Desperation has a smell if you've been around long enough. It's sweet at first, then sour. Pressure makes people, Tom said softly, or it breaks them. I thought of Mike's plans, of bridges and load-bearing math, of how he'd have explained stress fractures to me with pencils and patience. The numbers on Tom's list weren't just numbers. They were weight on rotten beams. A life can collapse with less. Motive wasn't a movie word anymore. It was a ledger with our names penciled in as solution. The thought came quiet and unwelcome if he could do that to his brother. What were we obstacles? Insurance policies. A house-shaped answer. It's indecent to measure your life in resale value. But fear will make a bookkeeper of anyone. I walked room to room in my mind, the wall where we marked heights, the drawer with birthday candles and rubber bands, the patch of sun Mike liked near the back door. I pictured it all cataloged, priced, gone. We have to consider that we're not safe, I said, the sentence turning my mouth dry. Saying it didn't make it truer, it made it heavier. Tom nodded once, the way men do when they mark where to brace. Love had kept us generous. Love now needed to keep us alive. Outside, a car passed, ordinary as ever. Inside, our air changed. There are moments when you stop being a passenger in your own life. This was one. I felt the seatbelt cut. I'll tell them everything, I said, imagining a desk, a cup of pens, a young officer learning how to look at old pain. Tom stared at the floorboard where he'd once hidden a Christmas bracelet for me, and shook his head. With what proof? With my silence in the record, he was right and wrong at once. The law wants clean lines. We had a tapestry of almosts. They'll see a mother grasping, he said softly, a father who waited too long. I wanted to argue that truth arriving late is still truth. But I heard how desperation can sound like invention. We needed more than memory. We needed a witness that didn't love us. The kettle clicked off. I hadn't turned it on. Then we gather what we can, I said, and the plan didn't exist yet, but the will did. Sometimes caution is just courage learning choreography. We would move carefully. We would not be still. The phone lit up with Danny's photo, the one where he's mid-laugh. Eyes crinkled just enough to look sincere. 40 years, he said. Brightness poured too fast. Let us take you to the mountains. Photos, a picnic, memory-making. The words fit together too neatly, like furniture staged for a sale. My skin cooled. Tom listened, his face becoming a blueprint. Let us think, I managed, my voice stepping around the trap laid out like a blanket. After we hung up, we stood very still, as if movement might trigger something. Accidents happen on mountains, Tom said, and it wasn't fear talking, it was math. I remembered the gorge, the officer's tidy word. I remembered bones learning gravity. The invitation glittered with love. It smelled like intent. Sometimes the devil brings a casserole. We looked at our calendar the way soldiers look at weather. If we go, I said, we go prepared. He nodded. We'd celebrate 40 years by staying alive. Tom knows tools. He knows how to hide them. He tested his phone's recorder until the room sounded like the room, no buzz, no telltale hum, then taught me the 2-button dance to wake it without looking. I wrote a letter to Sue, plain as bread. No drama wasted what we feared, what we'd learned. Where to find the truth if we didn't come home. I sealed it and slid it under the file where we keep birth certificates, and warranties for things that never break. We practiced ordinary what to pack, what to say, how to smile without offering our throats. I prayed like a woman who finally understood prayer is not magic, it's instruction. Do the next right thing, gather evidence, live if you can. If you can't, leave a trail. Courage is quieter than people think. It sits at a kitchen table with a pen, writing the names of those you trust, and tucks the note where love will find it. They arrived bearing competence. Jess spread out picnic supplies with a hostess's precision-checked blanket. Fruit stacked like a commercial. A new camera gleaming. "We'll take so many pictures," she bubbled, eyes bright enough to blind. Danny opened his pack to show ropes. "Carabiners, a flare gun just in case," he said. The phrase now a tell that rang in my skull. He narrated safety like a tour guide, pointing to precautions that doubled as props. I nodded and made my face soft. The trick of surviving is to let the wolf believe you're a lamb until his teeth are close enough to count. Tom asked about trail difficulty. Jess answered too quickly. "Easy. Kids do it." Her smile didn't reach her neck. I traced the seam of the blanket with a finger, anchoring myself to anything ordinary. Objects don't lie, not the way people do. They only sit where they're placed and reveal the hands that placed them. We ate small and slow, as if chewing could stretch the hours. The house knew our fear, its bones creaked in sympathy. Tom touched the groove in the table where Mike once carved an accidental crescent with a fork, and I watched the years pass across his face. 40 years with you," he said, voice low. "Best work I ever did." I pressed my cheek to his chest and counted the knocks of his heart. Like I was learning a hymn, we checked the phone again, then the letter, then the locks not for keeping danger out, but for reminding ourselves we still had doors. I laid out my clothes like armor that looked like a cardigan, before sleep. I asked God for what I always ask and rarely name mercy that looks like clarity, and just enough courage to carry it in the dark. Tom took my hand. Fear makes children of us all. Love walks us to morning anyway. Morning dressed itself in sunlight like innocence. Jess sang along to the radio, her pitch just sharp enough to be charming. Danny drove the way careful men do when they need the world to cooperate complete stops. Turn signals, the kind of courtesy that photographs well. He pointed out the view as the road began to climb, and I pretended to admire the distance. I slid my palm along the seat seam until I felt the phone's thin comfort, alive and listening. Tom stared through the windshield with a carpenter's focus, measuring angles no one else could see. We made small talk about weather and snacks, sentences that kept us tethered to the version of life where drives end with pictures and pie. The mountains rose like a promise and a warning, somewhere between mile markers. Peace shed its disguise. I looked at my hands, at the rings that had built our home, and decided that if this was our last drive, we would tell the truth. Mile markers slipped behind us until the gravel lot appeared. A wooden sign announcing the trail as if it were a promise. The air was alpine clean, pines combing the sky. A river working somewhere out of sight. Beautiful enough to forgive anything, I thought, and then corrected myself. Beauty forgives nothing, it only distracts. Danny killed the engine, opened my door with courtly care, and I stepped onto the dirt like stepping onto a stage I hadn't auditioned for. Tom stretched, hiding a wince. Jess took a selfie with the sign, chin lifted, captions already forming behind her eyes. A couple in neon passed us, cheerful, oblivious. I smiled back because camouflage is a survival skill. The first 100 yards were gentle, a ribbon through green. Birds started a conversation I could not translate. I touched Tom's sleeve, feeling the tremor he tried to tame. "Ready?" Jess asked brightly. I said yes, and told my bones to listen very carefully. Jess curated the morning like a hostess. "Look at these asters. Linda, aren't they darling?" The camera chirped, lens winking, our steps documented into a memory no one had earned yet. She framed Tom against the trees, told me to tilt my chin. adjusted a strand of hair with a tenderness that left no warmth behind. Danny drifted a pace behind us, the guardian angel position close enough to catch, close enough to push. I felt his gaze check distances, clock footing, mark the places the trail narrowed to single file. When hikers approached, he brightened, a performance switching on cheerful hello. A joke about getting our steps in, a son anyone would admire. Between passers-by, the mask relaxed, his mouth went neutral, eyes measuring again. Jess narrated the flowers as if she were leading a tour, buying us the illusion of purpose. I matched her enthusiasm, counted the clicks, wondered which photo would caption our obituary. When the light turned cruel, elevation isn't kind to 60-year lungs. The trail pitched steeper, switchbacks stacking like chores, and Tom's breathing thickened, a saw biting a knot. I slowed our pace with little tricks pretend to admire lichen. Retie a shoe, point out a view we could already see. Jess called these rests cute, then urged, just a little more, her cheerfulness tightening like a tourniquet. Danny offered my elbow with a chivalry that felt like rehearsal. Under my palm, his forearm was stone. My calves burned, sweat salted my eyebrows, the sun pressed a thumb to the back of my neck. We passed a bench carved with someone's memorial. I touched the name and took the blessing of a slower heartbeat. Tom squeezed my shoulder. "We're okay," then coughed a promise his body couldn't keep. Fatigue makes prey of most creatures. It trims choices, blurs edges, invites mistakes. I counted 8 breaths, then 8 more, and realized they were counting ours, 2 with every calculated pause. At a fork, there was a wooden post with a sun-faded map, the kind that tells a tidy story. Jess tapped the arrow for the overlook. "So close," she chirped, though the mileage betrayed her. Tom and I had studied this loop at the kitchen table. The overlook lived an hour ahead, not 10 minutes. Danny gestured toward a narrower spur, a thread of dirt stitched into boulder. "Quicker this way," he said, as if generosity had invented shortcuts. The official trail continued left, honest if longer. I traced the printed legend with one finger, buying time. "Are you sure?" I asked, letting my voice carry the weight of a woman who's fallen before. Danny's smile thinned. "Trust me, trust is a bridge with a posted limit. Exceed it, and the span remembers gravity." We stepped right. The trees opened just enough to expose sky. Somewhere, a raven complained. I heard the story changing tense from future to present danger. The rock outcrop rose like a ship's prow, clean against the blue, with grass slicked thin across its spine. Jess swept an arm toward it, eyes shining. "The photos from there will be stunning." Stunning, I thought, had 2 meanings. The main trail drifted below, voices of hikers turning to murmurs as distance folded them away. Up here was exposure, no railing, no trees, just a lip and the long fall that follows arrogance. Tom studied the slab the way he studies lumber testing give, noting seams. A breeze lifted my hair and placed it back down. Gentle as a warning, "Maybe the light is better from here," I offered. Jess's smile was a blade wrapped in velvet. "Trust me, Linda, we won't go too close." Danny adjusted the pack straps, weight settling with intent. The earth underfoot felt freshly awake, aware of names and choices. Beauty can be bait, so can the word together, and family can sharpen every edge dangerously. The spur was a sketch of a path, pebbles rolling like marbles under cheap shoes. I placed each foot as if it had its own mind and needed coaxing. Danny offered his hand. I took the sleeve instead, fabric safer than skin. His fingers hovered, a vulture's patience disguised as help. Jess called back, angles for the composition. "Step left, Tom, Linda." Turn a little, her voice steady as a metronome counting down. The wind gathered, then let go, as if testing our balance. I felt the ground's grammar shift from sentence to ellipsis. "Almost there," Danny said, and I tasted metal. Tom's jaw set, the familiar line he wears when a board wants to warp. We crabbed across a tilted slab, boots sliding, Grit whispering betrayal. My knee buckled, Danny's grip tightened. Corrective, proprietary. Got you, he said. The words sounded like ownership. I nodded anyway, and promised my body one more good step, then another. For the grandchildren waiting. At the crown of the rock, the world opened like a book. Every line of the valley underlined in light. Back a bit. Jess called. Professional now. No sugar. Tom's fingers found mine. Pressure Morse coding love and alarm. I glanced down a shoe length of sandstone, then the clean, unarguable absence. How close can a person stand to nothing before nothing learns their name? One more step, Danny said, voice neutral, hands loose at his sides, the way an athlete loosens before a start. I felt the tug of obedience the 1,000 times I'd moved for a photo, for convenience, for the comfort of others. The wind rose, my hair lifted like a flag surrendering twice. Here's good, I said, and didn't move. For a beat, nobody breathed. A hawk stitched a slow circle above us, hunting what didn't look up. Tom squeezed twice ready. I nodded once ready. Faith, in that moment, was friction, and courage was choosing not to comply. Jess's tone flattened. The sugar burned off. Smile, she said, lifting the camera. Last photo. The shutter half-clicked, baiting reflex. Danny softened his knees, a dancer's preparation. The angle of his shoulders saying more than his mouth ever would. Time lengthened, thin and bright as wire. I saw 3 lives at once, the woman I had been who yielded, the woman I was choosing to be who anchored, and the woman who might die for either mistake. Tom shifted, subtle, moving his center of gravity closer to mine. 3, Jess counted, though no one had asked for numbers. I smiled into the lens because sometimes survival requires a performance. The wind came back as if invited. My heel felt the rock's last roughness before emptiness. 2, Jess breathed. Danny's hands rose, not touching yet, claiming the air around my back. 1, I tasted iron and forgiveness and the old, hard word enough. I would not go quietly this time either. Danny lunged, palms out. The world snapped into motion with a sound like a rope pulled tight. Tom moved faster than pain allowed, catching Danny's wrist and yanking forward. Redirecting force the way he does with stubborn lumber, balance left us like a friend offended. Jess gasped, grabbed at Danny's sleeve, and the 4 of us became a single, clumsy animal, legs tangling, gravity making its simple case. There was time for one thought, clear as glass if I must fall. I will witness. The ledge vanished, air stepped in, wind tore the scream from my mouth and flung it somewhere I couldn't hear. Rock rushed up, impatient. I reached for Tom and found him. Bone, heat, promise. The first impact was light compared to the second. The second wrote its name across my ribs. I saw white, then blue, then nothing named. We kept falling inside stillness, then everything stopped and kept going. Pain argued, breath bargained, faith refused silence. Sound returned the way tide returns toes first, a gnat of buzzing near my ear, then the far-off crackle of leaves deciding where to settle. Pain lit up its map. I tasted iron, the world smelled like stone and sap. Tom's voice arrived as a thread, weaving into me. Linda, don't move, play dead. I obeyed the way a body remembers fire. Stillness became strategy. Above us, Danny groaned, then called to Jess. They're gone, both. Relief and calculation shared a breath in his words. They began drafting the story aloud. Rock gave way. We tried to help. Tragedy like students practicing a chorus. I learned their script with my eyes closed. If I lived, it would hang them. If I died, it would haunt them. Either way, truth had finally found its feet. I counted heartbeats, found Tom's hand, squeezed once. The gorge listened, somewhere. A camera beeped awake, and Mercy started taking notes. We stayed silent. They confessed to silence themselves. Silence returned in ragged pieces, first the rasp of our own breath, then the grit settling, then the faint drag of bodies moving away. Danny grunted. Jess whimpered, the sound of them scraped uphill like guilt. When their noise thinned, Tom's whisper threaded into me, "Can you move?" I tested fingers, toes, the reluctant hinge of a knee. Pain flared like struck matches, then steadied into a map I could read. Alive, I mouthed. He squeezed my hand, 2 pulses of relief. We inventoried what wasn't broken, what would hold, what would have to wait. Above us, a crow announced the obvious, and somewhere farther off, a helicopter was still just a possibility I prayed toward. Dust crusted my lips, blood had a copper memory. We hold still until we can't. Tom breathed. I nodded against the stone and learned the discipline of not existing, of letting time pass over me like weather. Hope, when it's real, is quiet as breath that refuses to end. Pain loosened the lid on truth, Tom began, voice catching on the corners of certain words. He followed the boys that night, he said, because fathers know when weather changes without looking at a forecast. He found them at the gorge, Mike flushed with anger, Danny taut as wire, papers slapped in the wind, bank statements, figures that didn't belong where they were. Accusation, denial, Mike saying, "Tell them, or I will." Danny's mouth shaping something smaller than regret. I saw it. Tom breathed, not a stumble, a shove. The world shifted under me again, but this time the drop was memory, and I hit every ledge. He told me how Danny pleaded, how he said accident until the word eroded meaning. How Tom chose the son left breathing over the son left beloved. I thought I could shepherd him back to good. He said, "Sheep do not become shepherds because we wish it." The past, at last, stopped whispering and spoke plain. First a distant thud-thud, like a second heart learning to beat. Then wind pressed the gorge. Needles of air combing leaves flat. Voices followed trained, brisk, kind without asking permission. Hold one called, closer than reason. Lines snaked down, bright against the gray rock, dancing in the rotor wash. I closed my eyes again and bent myself into the shape of almost gone. The stretcher's webbing kissed my shoulder, a hand touched my neck. Gentle as a question, faint pulse, someone said, the diagnosis we needed them to believe while believing, too. The I was more. Tom made no sound beyond breathing obedience turned survival. The team worked like carpenters, each knowing their cut, their brace, their timing. The world narrowed to straps, to commands, to the thunder of rescue beating the air into a road. As the line went tight and my body lifted, the river's voice rose to meet us, certain and ongoing. I let it pass below. I did not answer. Fluorescent daylight replaced the sky, and the world began speaking in numbers BP. 0290-something that had to be higher, lower, stable. I kept my eyes 2/3 closed. That posture of a woman who has left but might return if coaxed. Machines tattled in beeps, shoes whispered purpose across tile. Her vitals are odd. A nurse murmured. Bodies crowded my borders like a coastline. Everyone wanted to name. Somewhere outside my curtain, voices I knew rehearsed grief. My fear wasn't dying. My fear was living loudly enough. Too soon to earn a second push. So I hid in breath and prayer. Let the mask mist. Let the IV burn small and useful. Linda Carter, a doctor, said near my ear, testing my name against my pulse. I didn't answer to it yet. The body is a house. Tonight I kept the porch light on, but I didn't open the door. If survival is an art, deception is one of its brushes. The room dimmed, the curtain breathed, then parted, and sorrow walked in, wearing our son's face. Danny took my hand like a pen he meant to sign with. My skin crawled toward the wall. "Mom," he whispered, dragging honey over glass. Jess's sobs came on a metronome, wet and well-timed, the kind you can stop and start between sentences. They spoke the script they'd drafted on stone rock gave way. We tried to help, God's will phrases polished by practice. I counted heartbeats instead of lies. Danny leaned closer, forehead almost touching mine, and I smelled the metallic fear he carried under cologne. "We loved you," he said in past tense, careful and cowardly. The monitor kept its steady tattletale song. I kept my lips parted. Breath shallow, soul awake. There are performances that get applause, and there are performances that buy you 15 more minutes. I chose the latter and let their pity puddle uselessly on the floor. He couldn't help himself. Evil loves the sound of its own cleverness. Some truths belong in the ground like Mike. Danny breathed into my ear. A confession dressed as wisdom. The sentence fell into the room with weight. On the left, a nurse stiffened a young woman with steady hands and a name tag that said, Inez Garcia, RN. I watched her eyes widen, then sharpen, a witness being born in a blink. Jess flinched at Mike's name, surprise shaking one bead loose on her forgiveness necklace. What did you say? She hissed low. Panic drafting. Danny recovered with a lame shrug. I just mean, Mom always wondered, but the air had shifted. We had crossed a line he couldn't redraw. Inez didn't move for a heartbeat. Then she moved exactly right silent, smooth, gathering the sentence, pocketing it where policy stores truth. God sends angels in scrubs. They don't announce themselves. They chart, they clock, they listen, and when it matters, they act. Inez returned alone with a tray she didn't need. Eyes soft so she could look harder. She pretended to check a line, then whispered so low, only my pulse could hear it. If you can understand me, move one finger. I coaxed my index to life once, her lips pressed into a line that meant good. If you are in danger from them, move 3 times. The room concentrated. 1, 2, 3. Relief crossed her face and kept walking, turning into resolve. Okay, she breathed. I'm going to help. Keep pretending. She angled herself between me and the door, buying me a shadow to hide in, then adjusted my monitor with a flourish for any watching eyes. Sometimes salvation is choreography, 2 inches here, a nod there, a shared secret that travels through skin instead of air. Inez squeezed my wrist, pulse to pulse, a Morse code for courage. I hear you, she said without sound. I believed her. We had a witness and a plan. Hospital air changed temperature the way weather does before rain. A senior physician arrived calm, silvered, authority trimmed neat, followed by a man whose posture said he kept promises, Detective Mark Johnson. Inez stood beside them like a lighthouse, steady and bright because she must be. Mrs. Carter, the doctor said quietly, you're safe here. The detective's badge flashed once, not as a threat, but as a key. If you're able, he murmured, we'll listen. No one else will enter without our say. He scanned the room as a carpenter scans a joist testing load, noting cracks. The assurance arrived where I lived now in the body. My shoulders let go a fraction. My jaw unclenched from the truth it had been guarding. On your time, he added, meaning it. Sometimes justice wears a uniform. Sometimes it wears patience. Both are holy when delivered at the right dose. Inez stayed at my side, proof that God answers in teams. It felt like returning from a long swim, the first breath both burn and balm. I let the world sharpen. The ceiling grid resolved into squares. The detective's face held, then the doctor's, then Inez's, warm as a blanket. I can talk, I rasped, voice made of sand. Take your time, Johnson said, settling into the chair like he had all of it. I began at the beginning. I could bear Mike, the gorge, the word accident that became our family's rotten foundation, money missing, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the will, the mountain. I didn't dramatize. I placed facts like boards, straight and true, and let the grain show the story. Most important, I said, nodding toward the hall. My husband's phone. He recorded today from the trailhead to the fall, to their practicing the lie. The detective's gaze didn't flicker, but the room seemed to lean toward that word. Recorded. Evidence is mercy with a memory. We finally had some. They moved with the care of men carrying a newborn. Tom, bruised but stubbornly present, gave his consent and his passcode like a vow. A tech with clean nails and clean conscience cabled the phone to a station that looked like an altar to truth. Progress bars crept, patient as farmers. I heard our day play back in microbursts wind, footfall, that chirp of Jess's camera, Danny's voice low with rehearsal. The detective didn't smile. He simply breathed deeper. A man who's found the seam he needs to pry open. Chain of custody, someone said, and papers appeared for signatures that would keep wolves out later. Tom caught my eye through a doorway, lifted 2 fingers still here. I answered with the same. The phone, once just a pocket mirror of our small lives, had become a witness that didn't love or lie. Evidence is a kind of light. It doesn't comfort. It reveals that tonight was better than comfort. News travels by elevator and rumor before it could grow legs. Danny and Jess were still downstairs rehearsing for a congregation, accepting condolences from strangers with very kind faces, telling the tidy tragedy a rock, a slip, a helpless descent. Jess dabbed dry corners of her eyes with damp tissues. Danny stared middle distance like a man memorizing grief. They didn't know the script had changed upstairs, that the understudies, Truth and Time, were stepping into their roles. I pictured them on those vinyl chairs, cups of vending machine coffee, cooling untouched, imagining donations, imagining headlines, imagining our house with their names on the mailbox. Irony tastes like nickel. Inez peeked in with a small nod. Almost there, she mouthed. I thought about the oak table and Mike's old laugh, and the way justice sometimes creaks like old floorboards before it stands firm. Let them perform, I told my heart. The curtain they hung for us is about to fall on them. It happened without theater professional. Precise. Through the window, I saw blue windbreakers become sentences. Daniel Carter, Jessica Miller Carter, you're under arrest. The words carried the weight of lumber placed exactly where the load demands. Danny's face broke open in astonishment. He hadn't practiced. No, he barked, then softer. No, as if changing volume could change law. Jess reached for him and for the air. Neither offered purchase. Cuffs shone brief as honesty. Rights were read with the mercy of clarity. You may not. The detective's radio murmured confirmation, upstairs. Our room exhaled something older than relief. I didn't cheer, I didn't cry. I laid my palm flat on the blanket, feeling the hospital's hum, the same current that runs through refrigerators and courtroom microphones and the thin wires in men's hearts. Justice isn't vengeance, it's balance restored, weight recentered. In the lot, a gull laughed, ordinary and free. Inside me, something finally sat down. Panic unglued their duet. They were dead. Danny shouted, handing the recorder a gift. Jess pivoted. Tears now acid. He planned the cliff. She spit, shutting the plural like a coat on a warm day. Danny snapped back. You chose it, and there it was, the seam splitting under strain. The private blame made public. Officers widened their stance without raising their voices. The script kept itself. You can learn a lot about people by how they collapse who they throw, what they clutch, which lies they retire when they stop being useful. From my window, they were small, like paper dolls finally torn along dotted lines. A mic clipped to a lapel caught every syllable like rain in a rain gauge. Evidence multiplies when pride is thirsty. Detective Johnson stepped back into our doorway later. His face a careful blend of satisfaction and sorrow. They helped us help you, he said. They usually do, in the end. When rot is opened, it doesn't stop at the first softboard. The search turned up a small digital recorder in Danny's pack, his private surveillance of our lives, plus printouts with my signature forged into clumsy versions of my own name. The debts were darker than we knew names with no storefronts. Interest that compounds with bruises. Insurance forms sat pre-filled, just in case. A phrase now both joke and threat. The detective laid the items out on a tray table, the way Tom lays out chisels before beginning a delicate cut. These speak, He said simply, and they did of motive, preparation, character engraved in choices repeated. I touched nothing. I only looked, letting each object tell the part of the story words would muddy. Above the evidence, the fluorescent light hummed, indifferent and immortal. "It's enough," Johnson added. For the first time all day, the sentence didn't mean survival. It meant consequence. And consequence, tonight, sounded like mercy. News vans bloomed like dandelions in the hospital lot, bright logos, hungry microphones, names I'd only seen across dinner plates at 6 o'clock. Betrayal of the decade. A crawl announced, as if pain needed branding. Reporters rehearsed sympathy while cameramen framed our windows, like we were scenery. I turned the TV down to a whisper and watched without listening. People will make a stranger's tragedy their evening companion. I don't judge it anymore. We all want a story where the bad is named and the good survives. But my mind kept slipping past headlines to 2 small backpacks hanging by our mudroom door, crayons in the front pocket, a permission slip unsigned. Innocence has chores tomorrow. It still needs breakfast, mittens, a ride to school. I prayed their names softly, both of them, until the syllables steadied me more than any statement could. Let the world have its spectacle, I thought. My assignment is smaller, holier. Protect the children, tell the truth, keep breathing. Bob Whitman sat with the posture of a man who has watched storms pass through courtrooms. He spread files like maps and traced the route a jury might take. They'll try crime of passion, he said, panic painted as love, planning dressed in fog. He explained burdens and standards, the weight of beyond reasonable doubt, how evidence wears a suit and speaks, how my voice would be asked to stand beside it like a witness that bleeds. I breathed in, counted 4, breathed out, counted 6, the old trick I teach first graders who meet big feelings for the first time. Truth doesn't guarantee ease, Bob added, gentle but unsentimental. It gives us ground. Tom nodded. I squeezed the edge of the chair until steadiness arrived in my hands. I am a mother, I thought. I have testified my whole life at dinner tables, report cards, hospital beds. This time, I would do it under oath. Same voice, same heart, no more silence. The day I entered the courthouse, the floor felt like the inside of a piano, polished wood, holding 1,000 invisible songs. I smelled coffee, copier heat, the starch of uniforms. You don't have to, someone said, meaning well and late. But I did. The recording deserved a body beside it, a face to ferry it from sound to meaning. I wore the blue dress Mike once said brought out my eyes, as if color could lend courage. When they swore me in, the familiar words tasted new truth, and nothing but... My hands stopped shaking when I touched the rail oak again, steady again like God had arranged for trees to keep me upright wherever I went. I told it simple, not slick, dates, moments, the feel of gravel under shoes, the sentence Danny couldn't unsay. The room listened in the way good rooms do without interrupting. Somewhere, I felt generations behind me, women who survived and spoke anyway. I joined them. He wouldn't meet my gaze at first, as if looking might make me real. When he did, I saw flashes: the baby who slept on my chest, the boy who built forts, the teenager learning to shave in my mirror, and then the man who practiced lies until they fit. Grief and clarity shared the same chair inside me. My son died the night you killed Mike, I said, voice steady because the sentence had rehearsed itself for months, maybe years. Whatever has worn his name since is a stranger. Pens scratched. Someone coughed. The air acknowledged the line I had drawn, not as vengeance but as boundary. It is a holy thing to tell the truth about what love can't hold anymore. Danny's mouth tightened. A muscle near his eye jumped. Jess stared at the table like answers were written there in wood grain. I folded my hands and let silence do the next part of the work. It knows how. Jury rooms make decisions private. Verdicts make them public. When they filed back in, time slowed to syrup. The foreperson stood with a paper that sounded thicker than it looked. Words followed in a sequence that built a bridge. I could finally cross, guilty of first-degree murder for Mike, guilty of attempted murder for Tom and me, for Jess. Guilty as an accomplice, sentences aligned life without parole, a math that, for once, balanced. The gavel's knock wasn't triumphant, it was corrective. A level placed on a crooked frame until the bubble returned to center. I didn't cheer. I let my shoulders interpret relief on their own schedule. Beside me, Tom closed his eyes, and I watched 30 years leave his jaw. Justice doesn't resurrect. It restores. It says, here is the weight you no longer have to carry. Afterward, we stepped into the hallway where fluorescent lights made everyone equally human. I touched the wall. It felt level. We walked into the house like pilgrims returning to a chapel spared by fire. The flowers Danny brought last week had given up. Their necks bowed. I trimmed the stems anyway. An act of stubborn gentleness. In the sink, 2 plates from the morning of the hike waited. Witness and relic. I washed them with the care I reserve for heirlooms and grief. Sun found the kitchen at its old angle, warming the spot Mike used to stand, making toast and plans. Tom set the kettle. We didn't speak for a while. Some silences hurt. This one healed. Later. We opened windows and let the air learn our names again. I took the letter to Sue from its hiding place and held it not needed now, but honored. Healing doesn't arrive. It accumulates dropped off by small tasks, kind neighbors, a bird daring the feeder for the first time in winter. We made tea. We sat. Time, unafraid now, started up again. A year teaches you how to hold joy and ache in the same hand. Paperwork multiplied, then resolved, bedrooms became softer, backpacks found their hooks. On adoption day, the judge smiled the way teachers do when a student spells their name right for the first time, proud, tender, aware of the labor behind it. The children asked questions at bedtime that belonged to both of them and to no one. Why do grown-ups lie? Where do people go when they're gone? I told the truth, scaled to their hearts. We keep people alive with stories, I said, so we tell Mike's how he could fix anything, how he sketched bridges on napkins, how he made us pancakes shaped like initials. We talk about choices, about kindness with a spine, about how love is not a permission slip for harm. Some nights they fall asleep in the middle of a memory. I tuck the blanket in and whisper, we're safe. Then, to the dark, we're becoming, on the mantle. I keep Mike's watch beside a school photo, not as a shrine but as a compass. When mornings wobble, I wind it and remember time can be tender and firm at once. Tom teaches the kids to sand cedar smooth. They learn that grain resists before it reveals. We plant tomatoes by the fence Mike leaned on, and patience tastes red in July. On Sundays, we set 2 extra plates not for ghosts, but for gratitude and whoever needs a seat. Healing, I've learned, isn't a finish line. It's a table we keep extending, leaf by leaf. At night, we light 1 candle, naming courage softly, letting tomorrow sit beside us like a patient, unhurried friend, nearby. I used to think love meant quiet, that if I kept the peace, the house would hold, but silence can be a kind of accomplice. It teaches harm how to walk our halls without knocking. The day I played dead to live, I learned the only silence I'll ever keep again is the silence that listens for truth. Love, I know now, has borders truth and respect. Without them, it isn't love, it's debt. So I make coffee in the morning, touch the oak table Tom built, and practice small courage, the everyday kind, saying no when no is holy. Yes when yes is earned, stopping a lie at the doorway. When control shows up dressed as care, I name it. When fear tells me to hush, I speak. I forgive where it frees me. I refuse where it saves me. I don't play dead anymore. If you see the signs of control speak, would you forgive or cut ties when family commits harm and why? Share below. Subscribe for more Karma family stories.